Don Cherry has spent the last 60 years living and breathing hockey. A colorful character from his commentary to his fashion choices, Cherry is now giving readers more behind-the-scenes sports stories in his brand new book, Don Cherry's Hockey Greats and More. And we welcome Mr. Don Cherry back into the Your Morning studios. Hello to you, sir. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, man. Say hello to your dad. I'm a big fan.
I will. Now, you wrote this with your son.
Yeah, Timothy was the guy, and what happened, what we did was, one time in a cold rink, how we got it started, I think it was Etobicoke, and I said, we used to talk about the grapevine. You remember the grapevine a long time ago? And we picked up the story, Scotty Bowman, and we have baseball, Ferguson, Jenkins.
But that's what I was going to ask you. So he lives, your son lives across the street from you.
Yeah.
And he'd come over, and he'd write with you. It's very, everybody loves Raymond of the two of you. But he'd come over, a cup of coffee, you'd write. How would you decide, because it's hockey greats and more, and so it's not just hockey players. How did you decide who was going to be in the book and who was going to be on the outs?
Well, we'd have a coffee, we'd sit and, what do you think of this guy? Scotty Bowman was, and people like that was automatic. We had Battleship Kelly. A lot of people don't know about Battleship Kelly. And we both, I think it's, and we had them on. And back in those days, it was only one sports show, and that was us.
Yeah.
And so anybody come on, and we just picked out the ones we thought people would like.
What about Terry O'Reilly?
Terry O'Reilly, the Boston Strong Boy, I call him that. He's a great guy. He was, I think he was our leading scorer.
Yeah.
He had 13 fights. He had 200 minutes in penalties. I mean, on a first-place club. So everybody used to say, why didn't you take care of him? Why didn't you let him fight? It's like Jamie Benn with Dallas last night. That's his nature. You can't stop him. Your nature, you take away from him.
But in the book, he said he wouldn't talk about fights.
No, he didn't like fight. He didn't really like fights.
He talked to you about his hobby.
His hobby was stained glass, if you can believe it. Terry O'Reilly, but he...
That's a delicate hobby.
Yeah, and he'd come up to him and they'd say, about that fight, I'd prefer not to talk about the fight. And he really didn't like the fights, but hey, if you're looking for trouble, he was ready to go.
Now, you're a man known for your opinions, but you talk about your biggest regret in hockey, that Brad Park and Bobby Orr didn't play more together.
They played together, I think, 10 games. They had 20 points between them. It was like two cannons. I mean, Cesar Maniego was the goalie. He says, when those two guys were on, it was like two cannons. They're both 1-2 in the North. I would even want to stand. We went the seventh game with the Montreal Canadiens, so you can, hey, if we had him, it'd be no problem.
Now, we had Bobby Orr on the show just a while ago, and we asked him about you, and here's what he had to say.
That's one thing people don't know in Don Cherry. He's a very sensitive guy, believe it or not.
Really?
He's a sensitive guy. You can't imagine the calls I get from him, or the notes I get from him to take care of this young kid or soldier, police officer that's having tough times. But he does a lot of that. Doesn't advertise it, so I'll advertise it for him. But he's a very generous guy. And Hockey Night in Canada, I don't know how many times he was saying hello to Arva, my mother, or Elsie, who was my grandmother. And my father, he was so proud. He could pick up the phone and say, yes, I'm calling Don Cherry.
If you didn't know anything about that man, if you didn't know anything about hockey and you spent the day with him, you'd just think he was one of the kindest men in the world. Turns out he's one of the greatest players to ever play.
Well, he's the greatest player I've ever played. And I'll give you the last year he played for me. 46 goals. Now, you kids are watching. He was the defenseman. 89 assists, plus 123, and plus 123. And he could throw them pretty good.
I got to ask a question. As broadcaster to broadcaster, find out that when you do Coach's Corner, you show up on an empty stomach, but you got a few cups of coffee in you. Is that your fuel?
It is.
Yeah.
And if you notice the players, next time you notice the players walking into the games, they have a cup of coffee in their hand. And I have about 2 or 3 cups of coffee. I have an empty stomach, and I'm ready to go. And most hockey players are the same way. I remember one time in Minnesota, I went in, they were all sitting there drinking their coffee. So it pumps you up, and you're ready to go. It's got to have something going.
Don, my last question for you is about hockey parents, because you write something in the book. Hockey parents get a bad rap. They're either too pushy or not pushy enough, or they're trying to coach when they should be cheering their kids on. And I'm a hockey dad. I got my son's one of my sons is a goalie. The other's a defenseman.
Oh, goalie.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a different breed entirely.
Well, he said, you write, there are no better parents than hockey parents. Nobody sacrifices as much as hockey parents. So to all the hockey parents who are watching right now, what would you tell them?
Well, I tell them, keep doing, don't criticize. I remember one kid got a hat trick, and the guy should have had 4. Encouragement, if the right kid, encouragement, encouragement, encouragement. The worst thing you can do is criticize a kid because you got to build up their confidence because hockey, as you know, it's a tough sport and then you can lose confidence pretty fast.
Absolutely. Don, thank you so much for being here. Come back anytime with a book, without. We'd love to chat with you.
Say hello to your dad. I'm a big fan.
I will indeed. Thank you, my friend. Appreciate it.